Hey guys, we're going to read a little bit this afternoon from the Tale of Despereaux. It's been a while since I've been on here and shown you my face, so I thought I would come on here today and read to you so you can see my facial expressions, because that's important when someone's talking and reading and communicating with you, isn't it? We're on chapter 38, and if you will remember, when we left off, Mig and Roscuro had gone upstairs to Princess P's bedroom and basically taken her hostage. And they're taking her into the deep downs because Mig thinks that they're going to do a switcheroony and then she's going to become a princess. What do you think's going to happen? Do you think Despereaux and the P are going to fall in love and live happily ever after? This strange threesome made their way down the golden stairs of the castle. The princess and Mig walked side by side, and Roscuro hid himself again in the pocket of Mig's apron, and Mig pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. The princess was led to her fate as around her everyone slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming that his wife, the queen, was a bird with green and gold feathers who called his name, Philip, 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 without ceasing. Cook slept in a too small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that she could not find. "Where did I put that?" she mumbled in her sleep. "Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favorite soup. I must find it." And not far from Cook in the pantry, atop a bag of flour, slept the mouse Despereaux, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armor, of darkness, and of light. And in the whole of the darkened sleeping castle, there was only the light of the candle in the hand of Miguery Sow. The candle shone on the princess's dress and made it sparkle, and the princess walked tall in the light and tried not to be afraid. In this story, reader, we have talked about the heart of the mouse and the heart of the rat and the heart of the serving girl Miguery Sow, but we have not talked about the heart of the princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were these: a very small, very hot, burning coal of hatred for the rat who was responsible for her mother's death. And the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a deep sadness that her mother was dead and that the princess could now only talk to her in her dreams. And what about the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I'm pleased to tell you that the P was a kind person, and perhaps more importantly, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forcibly taken to a dungeon, when you have a large knife pointed at your back, when you are trying to be brave, you are still able to think for a moment of the person who is holding that knife. So empathetic just means you can feel what other people are feeling. You'd be able to think, "Oh, poor Meg, she just wants to be a princess so badly and she thinks that this is the way. Poor, poor Meg. What must it be like to want something that desperately?" That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart: hatred, sorrow, kindness, empathy. The heart that she carried inside her as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen, and finally, just as the sky outside the castle began to lighten, down into the dark of the dungeon with the rat and the serving girl. This is chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Miguery Sow had done. And finally, Despereaux awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish." Despereaux sat up and looked behind him. Oh, his tail! Gone, given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stub. "And more foul play! Gregory is dead!" cried the cook. "Poor old man, that rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much." "Oh, no," whispered Despereaux. "Oh, no, Gregory is dead." The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down from the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman jangling a ring of keys. "That's right," said Louise. "All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon, and when they come back up, who do they have with them? They have the old man, dead. And now you tell me that Mig is missing, and I say, who cares?" Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. "What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken right out from under our noses and queens drop dead and we cannot even take comfort in soup?" And with this, Cook started to cry. "Shh," said Louise. "I beg you, do not say that word." "Soup!" shouted Cook. "I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup!" And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise. She put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It'll be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe at her tears. "It won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our darling little princess away. There ain't nothing left to live for without her." Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken out loud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating woman as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around her shoulder. "What will we do?" wailed the cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time anyway for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For, having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon. And being somewhat smarter than Miggery Sow, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Mig could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. That's the end of that chapter. Next we have chapter 40, which is called Forgiveness. I think we have time to read it as well. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there. And so Despereaux slipped through the hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council. 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters. Now they think he's dead, probably, because they put him in the dungeon. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" one said. "Excuse me?" said another. "I didn't hear that right. I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost." And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked, and there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester, that's his dad. "Son, you have come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had only been gone a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers quivering. "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No," called the most very honored head mouse. "No." "I've destroyed it," said Lester. "I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me?" He clasped his paws together and looked at his son. "No," shouted the head mouse again. "Do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the head mouse. "Son," he said, "please." Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. "Forgive me," said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love, a powerful, wonderful thing. And it's a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? Remember that word? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, "I forgive you, Pa." And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop his own heart from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. "You were wrong," he said, "all of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent." "Never," said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized that he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he had faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, didn't matter at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. "Mice of the council," he said, "we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote A." And from the members of the Mouse Council there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of A's. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father, Lester Tilling, and he turned his head away from the other members of the Mouse Council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. And there is a picture of Despereaux and the other mice in the Mouse Council. And that is the end of chapter 40. And tomorrow we will begin chapter 41. We're getting close to the end of this book. I hope you've been following along with me. I know it's been long and drawn out, but good books are worth it. Miss you, love you, bye.